Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murders of Jane Kuria, her two teenage daughters, Isabelle and Annabelle, and the attempted murders of her young son, Jeremy, and her nephew, PK. The Kurias were a hard-working immigrant family chasing the American dream until one summer morning in Georgia when everything changed. Jane Kuria and her two teenage daughters were brutally murdered in their own home. Her young son and nephew were left clinging to life, the only witnesses to a massacre that they can't even remember. There are no suspects, there is no motive, and there is still no justice because nearly 2 decades after the murders, the case still remains unsolved and the silence is chilling. So, who murdered the Kuria family and why? But before we get into all the details of this case, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that delivers fresh, never frozen, chef-curated, ready-to-eat meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes, which for somebody with a schedule like mine, that's a lifesaver. So if you've been here a while, you would know that in the past I have loved on HelloFresh. I do love HelloFresh. They're another meal delivery service, and HelloFresh now owns Factor, which is pretty cool because then I can go and I can switch back and forth depending on which service I'm feeling at the moment. And I got to be honest, I've been having like a several month love affair specifically with Factor. Factor has been my bread and butter lately. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning, and for me, that is so valuable because of the fact that planning every single meal that you're going to eat every single day is exhausting and it's time consuming. And Factor helps set me up for success by helping me save that time and that energy by skipping the grocery store, skipping the prep, skipping the cleanup. And that's invaluable because it helps me take the time and energy that I would have put into that and put it into things that are more important to me, like being a present mother or making sure to do the work that I have to do, right? Do the work that I need to get done in the time that I have allotted myself to do it. And to do all of that without sacrificing my wellness goals, which I have been known to make those sort of sacrifices out of exhaustion and convenience. But honestly, Factor is even more convenient because it's literally in my house. It's dietitian approved and their meals are cheaper and more delicious than takeout anyway. I literally haven't had a single Factor meal that I don't love. And that sounds dramatic. And maybe I'm a dramatic person, but it's also the truth. And what's amazing is that they have a weekly menu of 35 different menu options to choose from. And the offerings that they have for you to select from are very inclusive. They have things from like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or my personal go-to, the vegan and veggie. And on top of the meals, Factor now offers loads of snack options. Okay, there are like 60 different add-ons weekly from breakfast to my personal favorite and the thing I keep stocked in my fridge all the time, and that is their juices. I was loving on the smoothies for a while, but lately, I don't know, I just really like the juices. And you know who else likes the juices and will not stop saying mo, mo, mo is my toddler. So if all that sounds as good to you as it does to me, head on over to factor75.com, or you can click the link down below and use the code 50BRATTERSTEIN at checkout to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50BRATTERSTEIN at factor75.com to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Factor for partnering with me on today's video. It's sponsors like Factor that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. So with that, today I'm going to tell you the story of the attack on the Kuria family. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this: who do you believe is responsible for the attack on the Kuria family? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the Kuria family massacre. To start this, let's talk about who the Kuria family was and how we ended up being in Georgia in the first place, because I mentioned that they were an immigrant family. The head of the household, the matriarch of the household, this was Jane Kuria, and she was born and raised in Kenya, and that's where she actually gave birth to her 3 children as well. Her first child was a girl, her daughter, named Isabelle, followed by her little sister, which was Annabelle, and last, her son, Jeremy, her baby boy, Jeremy. I can't say for sure what the family life was like in Kenya. There's not a lot of reporting about what things were like for them in the early years. But what I do know is that things did go poorly for them after the death of Jane's husband, the kid's father, due to complications related to pneumonia. It was after his death in 2001 that Jane and her 3 kids, which at this point would have been 2 preteen girls and a little baby boy, left Kenya. They fled Kenya to go to the United States, which already sounds like such a huge choice to make. And that's something that you wouldn't make lightly. Like, you know what I mean? Like a single mother with a baby and 2 preteen girls, that's a lot. But you may ask, like, why did she make this choice then? Well, Jane, who went by Mabella to her family and her friends, by the way, she was leaving Kenya to go to the U.S. and she was seeking asylum. And the reason she was seeking asylum is because reportedly she was scared for the lives of her and her daughters. She was scared that she and her kids were going to be killed because she was vocally against female circumcision. And if you haven't heard about this, this is also referred to as female genital mutilation, or FGM, which, quote, this practice involves the partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injuries to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. And apparently, they often do this without even using any sort of anesthesia. So it's just completely horrific. Now, this was reportedly outlawed in Kenya a decade after Jane fled, which would have been in 2011. But reportedly, there are still some communities that practice it because of the cultural significance, traditions, and social norms, much like, bullfighting in Spain. Something that a lot of people are against, but some people still practice because it is deeply ingrained in who they are and their culture. Or so I've read. I know nothing about this, and this is just what I'm getting from the internet. This is something that we don't do here, and I don't know a ton about. So if I sound ignorant, it's because I quite literally am. But anyways, apparently Jane went through this herself as a child, and it was a situation and experience that was horrific to her and traumatizing to her. So because of that, she was very vocally against it, which was very brave, but also very dangerous. So she wanted to leave Kenya. She wanted to get away. They fled to the United States, first going to Boston, but eventually landing in Powder Springs, Georgia. Now, Powder Springs is a city about 30 minutes outside of Atlanta, and it's in Cobb County with a population of approximately around 13,000 people. At least that's what it was when they moved there, and now it's closer to like 20,000. But anyways, this is an area that was and is still now considered to be a safe place to live with a lower violent crime rate compared to the national average. While it does have a higher rate of property crimes, it's still a pretty popular area in Atlanta, known for its, quote, safe and friendly atmosphere. And this seemed like the perfect place for her to move with her family because she already had some family who lived in the area, and apparently it had a well-functioning, how would you say this? There was a large Kenyan community that was already set up in this area, so going there would feel more like home. It wouldn't be such a fish out of water situation like just going to like Los Angeles, for example. Well, Los Angeles probably has a pretty good Kenyan community as well. I don't know for sure, as I am not Kenyan, but I would imagine because we have everything. It's fantastic here. The melting pot do be melting. Anyways, this area, large Kenyan community, it felt like the perfect place for her to go to raise her kids. Now, this change was definitely hard on Jane. I mean, she was 40 years old at this point. She was a single mother with 3 kids living in a brand new country. But everybody who knew her said she was very strong and very resilient and very determined to build a better life for her and her kids. And honestly, she must have been, because can you even imagine packing yourself, your kids, your entire lives up and moving to a whole ass new country where you know nothing about the culture or where things are, or like, I don't know about you, but I'm very much a creature of habit. So for somebody to go out and do something like that, I think that it is a very brave thing for someone to do, in my opinion. So she makes this choice, this brave choice to make a better life for her and her family by coming here seeking asylum. And she wasn't even granted asylum. She was literally scared for her and her daughter's life, came over here legally. She worked 2 jobs. She paid into the system by working these 2 jobs. She went to church. Her and her family were active members of Christ Harvesters Ministries International in nearby Marietta. She kept her head down and she did what she had to do. And still, she wasn't able to be granted the protection and legal status or be given the opportunity for permanent residency in the future. Now, Jane did try to appeal this decision, and her attorney that was working her appeals case said that the hearings for her 2 daughters' appeals were going to be heard on August 29th, but unfortunately, they never got to have those hearings because the entire family, well, not the entire family, but Jane and her 2 daughters were killed before that date ever came in what her attorneys called a savage act of violence. Her attorney said that Jane was so sweet and was doing everything in her power to have a good life and get herself and her family to safety. And he said specifically of this, and I quote, "I'm shocked. It's scary to think that this could happen to anyone, especially to anyone who came here seeking the protection of the United States." And he's right. It would be so scary for this to happen to anyone, but for this to happen to this family specifically just adds another layer of tragedy because Jane worked so hard to get her family to safety. You know what I mean? Like, she was said to be such a present and attentive mother. She was described as maybe a little bit strict, but also just the type of person who wanted to make sure her kids took advantage of every opportunity. She was there to make sure her kids got up on time, did their homework on time, got to school on time every day because she wasn't going to make all of this sacrifice and come to this new place for her kids to like slack off and not take every opportunity that was given to them. Her world just revolved around her kids. Jane was said to be very strong and outspoken. She was a real alpha female, but she was also said to be kind and bubbly and unique and like the life of the party, and her energy was amazing. She had this big smile and these warm eyes that just brought you into her. Jeremy said that his family and his childhood was fantastic. He said his mother was loving and so good to him, but then he lost her and his 2 sisters all in one fell swoop just 6 years after coming to America. And by America, I mean specifically the United States. Moving on, once in Georgia, the family settled nicely. They got this nice big house and a quiet neighborhood. The kids were enrolled in school. Jane got a job. She actually got 2 jobs. She got a job working at a local hospital as a nurse, and she also got a job working at a local nursing home. This one was part-time, but she needed both of these jobs, 2 jobs, just to make ends meet, and she had this incredible work ethic. She was close with those she worked with, and she was close with those that she cared for. She was said to have been very good to the seniors that she was taking care of at the nursing home. She made their days brighter, and they made it possible for her to provide the life that she was providing for her and her kids. Both Isabelle and Annabelle were adjusting well to their new life in the States, which would be difficult as preteens to have such a big change, but they seemed to be taking it like champs, okay? Annabelle, who went by her nickname of Wambui, I hope I'm saying that right. It's Wambui, to those that knew and loved her. She was in high school. She was a talented 11th grader at McCurn, MCEACHERN, high school. She was part of the school's pep squad and had even started volunteering at the church that she and her family attended. Isabelle, who by this point had actually graduated high school, she was a nursing student at North Metro College in Chattanooga. I know how to say that one, which was about 2 hours away, where she was taking classes with the dreams of becoming a pharmacist. And something about Isabelle that I thought was just very sweet and worth mentioning, because I like the thing about me when I talk about these cases is I want to tell you about what happened to them, especially in this particular case, since it is unsolved. But I also want to tell you about who these people were and what their lives were like, because they are more than just their deaths, you know. Because some people, I get comments sometimes that are like, just get to the story. And I'm like, this is the story, okay? You know what I mean? Like, this is the story. These people's lives are the story because they lived and they're no longer here and they matter. But anyway, Isabelle, she was super close with her cousin Diana. And unfortunately, Diana, we will get to her. She is the one who ends up finding her family's bodies in the crime scene later. But throughout their lives, Isabelle and Diana actually shared a birthday. So when they were younger, they would always have joint parties. But when they got older, you know, they had separate worlds, separate lives, but they still wanted to make the birthday that they shared with each other special, even if they weren't actually celebrating together anymore. Anyways, one birthday shortly before she was killed, Isabelle had texted Diana and was like, hey, I got you a present and I left it in your mailbox. And it turns out she got her a CD and she left it in Diana's mailbox as a surprise. And Diana was just like, oh my gosh, you're never going to guess this, but you should check your mailbox as well, because she too had bought an Isabelle, an Amy Winehouse CD, and left it in her mailbox as well. And I don't know, something about that just, it feels so, it's a family, it's a person, it's a real person with a real life. And it just, gave me feelings that I wanted to see if I can give you. But moving on, let's talk about little Jeremy. Okay, Jeremy was 7 years old, and he was a typical happy little boy whose world revolved around family and friends and basketball and his dream of one day being able to return to Kenya. He was in elementary school at this time, and he was the baby of the family and, I don't want to say spoiled, but let's just say doted on seriously by his older sisters. And they always made sure to walk him to the bus stop every day before school. So this brings us to the summer of 2007. The kids were out of school for summer vacation, and they were just having so much fun. Annabelle and Jeremy were out of school. They were loving that. And Isabelle was actually on vacation because she's in college, remember? She's on vacation, and she's home for the break. And then to add on to the pile of fun that they were already going to be having, considering they were all together and they missed each other, is that their little cousin, this is 11-year-old PK, he was going to be there to have some fun. I guess PK was the son of Jane's cousin Pauline. Now, I don't know how many cousins removed that would make PK. Like, is he a second cousin? Is he a third cousin? I don't know how that works. But cousin PK, he was going to be there to hang out with them because he was visiting from Kenya. He was visiting his mom from Kenya, and he had only been in the States like 2 or 3 days by this point. So he hadn't really spent much time with his mom. But since PK and Jeremy were close enough in age to be compatible as friends in addition to being cousins, he was going to be going over to have some summertime fun with his cousins, and he was dropped off on July 29th, 2007. And unfortunately, after having a single day of fun in the sun, everything was going to change forever. This brings us to the morning of July 30th, 2007, and nobody can get a hold of Jane. Several family members are trying to call her. It starts with her relative, I think cousin, a relative named Lucy. I guess Lucy and Jane talked often. Lucy's trying to get a hold of Jane. She can't get her on the phone. And it's not just her. Also, Pauline, PK's mom, is trying to call and get a hold of Jane because, her son is with Jane, but Jane's not answering the phone. I guess when PK was there, PK and Jeremy had a nice fun time. They had their little slumber party. And of course, his mother, wanting to be a mom and do mom things, is calling to find out how that went, talk to her son, make sure everything's okay. But every time she calls, she gets no answer. So she calls, but she can't get a hold of anyone because she's not just trying Jane's phone. She's trying Isabelle's phone. She's trying Annabelle's phone, and she can't get a hold of anyone. And that's incredibly unusual for no one to be answering the phone. So feeling a little nervous, but not alarmed at this point, she sends her older son, this is PK's older brother, over to the house to see if he can figure out what's going on. When he gets there, he sees that there are cars in the driveway. There's Jane's black Toyota in the driveway and also Isabelle's car because she drove home from school. So he's like, okay, somebody must be here. But when he goes to the door and knocks on the door, he gets no answer. There's a window at the side of the door, which I hate. I see houses that have that. And if I was to ever have a house, which I do not, I have an apartment, but if I was ever to have a house, I don't think I would want that. I don't want anybody looking in, because he did. He looked in and he didn't see anything weird. So he just figured that since the cars were there, but nobody was answering, maybe somebody came and picked everyone up, which this logic, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me because it's a lot of people. It's Jane, Isabelle, Annabelle, PK, Jeremy. And then whoever's driving that sticks, they would have to have a van. But maybe people have vans. People do have vans. Not maybe. People definitely have vans. So his thought process was maybe somebody picked them all up and they all went out to eat or something. I gotta be honest, that wouldn't have been my first guess, but I don't know how young this guy was or how not paranoid he was, because for me, I would immediately be they're dead. That's how my brain works. If my husband goes to work and doesn't text me back immediately, even though I know he has a job that keeps him away from his phone for hours at a time, I'm he's dead. He didn't make it to work, he's dead. So that's just how my brain works, but not everybody's wired the way I am. So this guy goes home, tells his mother, Pauline, what he saw / did not see, really. And for whatever reason, she's satisfied enough to not immediately head over to the house herself to see what's going on. Why that is, I can't really say, but for whatever reason, that is what happened. So it wasn't until the next day, this would have been August 1st, 2007, when Pauline still couldn't get a hold of Jane, still couldn't get a hold of anybody, still couldn't get an update on her child, that she's like, okay, something's up. We need to figure out what's going on. So she actually walks to her next door neighbor's house. This is Jane's cousin Diana's house. I mentioned Diana. She's the one who shared the birthday with Isabelle. She gets there before 10 o'clock in the morning, knocks on the door. Diana opens it. Pauline tells her what's going on, how she can't get a hold of her. Nobody can get a hold of Jane or either of the girls. And it's been 2 days, and asks if Diana can drive Pauline over to Jane's house to get some answers as to what's going on. Which really, the fact that she needed a ride from Diana could explain why she didn't go over there the night before. Maybe because she didn't drive. She didn't want to like inconvenience somebody. I don't know for sure, but that's just what's going through my head at this moment. And I'm just word vomiting to you. Anyways, Diana's like, yeah, no problem. And the two hopped in her car and made the 15-minute drive over to Jane's house. When they pulled up to Jane's house, they found that still the cars were in the driveway. And in seeing this, Pauline went into a little bit of a panic. She seemed frantic. She was talking super fast. And it seemed like every thought that was going through her head, she was just kind of spilling out. She was thinking and saying like, what's going on? Why is my cousin acting so out of character as to not answer the phone, as to not call me and tell me what's going on with my kid? Like at this point, she had barely even seen her son since he had been in the States. And now all of a sudden she can't get a hold of the person who's got her kid. And it seems to me like she was trying to rationalize a situation that was irrational and try to come up with an answer, like a logical explanation, when there just simply wasn't one. So Diana tells Pauline, you go to the front door, you go see if anybody's there, go knock, wait for somebody to answer. I'm going to go around back because there's a back door as well, and we'll figure out what's going on. So Pauline does just that. She goes up the stairs. She knocks on the door. She gets no answer. She jiggles the handle. She finds that it's locked. She looks through the window, all the things that one would do, and there's no answer. So she goes down the stairs to go around back to meet with Diana. Okay. Diana at this point has gone around back. She's going up the elevated porch. There will be photos so you can see what I'm talking about. She goes up the elevated porch to the back sliding glass door. And when she gets to the top of the stairs, she realizes that the sliding glass door is cracked open a little bit, which to me sounds very eerie, but I'm coming from the perspective of knowing what happened here, and she's not even coming from the perspective of somebody who's been panicking for 2 days thinking about the worst case scenarios. So when she sees that it's kind of open, she's like, oh, okay, I'm going to open this. I'm going to find Jane in the kitchen making breakfast for the kids because it's that time of day. So she opens the sliding glass door, she moves the blinds to the side, and she enters the house, but she finds that it's super dark and it's super quiet. The only sign of life in the house at all is that there's a TV on in the darkness, playing cartoons in the distance. So as Diana enters the house, she starts to call the family out by name, but she gets no response. And at the same time she's doing this, Pauline is now climbing up the stairs to the elevated back porch. So this is the scene. Diana steps in, and when she looks around, she starts to take in more of the picture, and she sees blood. She sees blood on the walls, she sees blood on the floor, and she sees a bloody dead body lying on the ground. Naturally, she screams. She steps out of the house quickly. She tells her aunt to get back down the stairs, that they couldn't go inside the house, that they needed to get out of there right then and there. And Pauline reasonably is freaking out and is like, oh my God, like, what did you see? What's going on? So Diana tells her that she saw a body on the floor, but she couldn't tell who the body belonged to. And in response, Pauline just started to scream. Because imagine this woman knowing your kid was in this house. I literally, can you see him? Can you see? I literally have goosebumps. It's a nightmare. Now, when Diana saw this body, she thought it was that of her aunt, but she couldn't know for sure, which you would think the body was lying face up, so you would think you'd be able to tell. But apparently there was so much swelling to the face that she couldn't be certain. So they leave the house. They call 911. 911 needs the address, and they realize they don't even know the address for this house. So she runs to the mailbox. She gets a leaflet. She gets the address. She gives it to the 911 operator, and she tells them, quote, I saw a body on the floor, and there's blood. And within moments, police were arriving on the scene. Now, when police showed up at this house, they had no idea what they were in for. And what they were in for is what one officer called the most vicious attack they had ever seen in their entire career, an attack that they called shockingly evil. When they received this call, they got a call about blood and one potential body. But when they entered this home, they were going to find that it was much worse. And at this point, Pauline and Diana didn't even know how much worse it was. So they're there. They're with police. There are people inside the house. And after a bit of time, one officer, they can't hear what's being said. They can just see. So they see one officer hold a hand out. First, he holds out a hand with 5 fingers, then a hand with 2, then a hand with 3. And at the time, they didn't know what that meant, right? But what they would later find out is that there were 5 victims, 2 were alive, and 3 were dead. So they learned that crushing information, but they don't know who's dead and who's alive. They don't know that both Jeremy and PK were taken away for treatment. PK was taken by ambulance and Jeremy had to be taken by helicopter, but the 3 women were dead. The boys were taken to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at Scottish Rite, where Jeremy underwent surgery. And I didn't read if PK needed surgery or not, but either way, both boys were in critical condition. Both boys were beaten bad enough that without treatment, they could have died. And this was horrific. And on top of that horrific situation that both of these boys were beaten to the point that they were nearly dead, the police then had to worry because of the fact that whoever was there clearly intended for everyone in that house to die. So they were concerned that once the news got out that two of these people had lived, these boys were two living potential witnesses that whoever did this was going to come back and try to kill these boys as well. So when they were in the hospital, the cops actually had like people guarding them at all times. Now, both Pauline and Diana were taken to the Powder Springs Police Department so that they could give their statements because they had just come upon a horrific crime scene. And in the meantime, they were calling like every family member they could think of because this family was incredibly close. The community was close. They were like, you know what I mean? Like there was a real family oriented, didn't even seem to quite cover it. They were incredibly involved in each other's lives. So the attack on these 5 people affected so many other people. So they wanted to call and tell them like as soon as they could what was going on. This family just meant a lot to a lot of people. And then there's poor Pauline, man, who is just, I can't even imagine being in her position, how devastating this would be. Because especially at the beginning, she didn't even know who was alive and who was dead. She didn't even know if her child was alive. Her child who had just come to the States to see her, who she hadn't even spent that much time with. It's devastating and it's maddening to imagine being in this woman's position. But once they were at the station, Pauline would learn what happened. Pauline and Diana would both learn what happened. And what they would learn is that somebody had come into that house and had beaten everybody. Both boys were beaten to the point that they were almost dead. And then left for God knows how long in that house, in that condition, without anybody knowing what happened. And at this point, they were both unconscious. They were in comas. And then they would learn that the 3 women, Jane, Isabelle, and Annabelle, were all dead because they had literally been beaten to death, which that screams personal to me personally. And Diana said of learning this information, and I quote, "Everything just kind of stood still and nothing moved. Everything is going on, but you're not making sense of anything." And then she added, quote, "There was pain, anger, and more so fear than anything else, because it's a whole family that are attacked and you wonder who is next. Are they coming for us? Is it something random?" She said like whoever this was didn't even spare the kids. So now we're going to talk about what police found when they entered that house. So if that's something you don't want to hear, this is your warning that we are now discussing it. Okay. 46-year-old Jane was found in the kitchen and she was just surrounded in blood. It was all over the walls. It was all over the floor. And it was clear that this had been a very violent struggle. And it was clear to police that Jane was the intended target or like the focus of this person's rage. Jane had fought for her life, but had unfortunately not made it. And that's because it was clear that whoever was there there to kill her. Okay. They weren't there to hurt her. They were there to kill her. They had really wanted her dead because her murder was absolutely overkill. She was beaten far worse than one would need to beat her in order to take her life. 19-year-old Isabelle was found at the bottom of the stairs. They believe that unlike her mother, she was taken by surprise by the attack because she didn't really seem to put up much of a fight. They believe that she heard her mom being attacked, came down the stairs to see what was going on, and was ambushed by the killer at the bottom of the stairs. Now, 16-year-old Annabelle was found upstairs. She was down the hall from her sister, and like her sister, there didn't appear to be much of a struggle. Her body was found beaten in the hallway. And a few feet away from Annabelle, police found that the boys had both been attacked in the bedroom. Somebody had literally come in and attacked these 2 little boys while they were in their beds. And as horrific as that sounds, police believe that the fact that they were attacked in their beds is part of why they survived, because they believe that the mattresses and the pillows they were laying on absorbed some of the blows, which made it so that they weren't killed by their attack. And PK seemed to have even been awake enough or conscious enough to have tried to move, because when they found him, he was unconscious next to the couch. Now, when the news came out that this had happened, nobody could understand who would want to hurt this family. I mean, murder in general wasn't super common in this area. Like in Powder Springs, before this multiple murder, there hadn't been a murder in the area in years. So for the first murder in years to not just be a murder, but a triple murder and a double attempted murder on a family who had like no known enemies, no criminal activity, nothing in their lives that would at least point to like why this happened, even if the reason could never be justified, because who could justify doing this? There was nothing that made any sense. So it was super confusing. No one understood like why somebody could come to this house and try to take out an entire family. Like who could possibly hate them that much? Diana, who found her family's crime scene, said of this, and I quote, "We're very fun-loving people. We love people, so we wouldn't find any reason for that to happen, and especially to them because they were so polite, and my aunt always got everyone together for family dinners, get-togethers. She was just a beautiful, outgoing person." One officer said that what scares him the most about this case is that somebody could be so brutal to 3 women and 2 little kids and then never go on to say a word about it. Because again, this case is unsolved. He said that that's narcissistic behavior, that's sociopathic behavior, and that is terrifying. Now, in the beginning, police really didn't have much to go on. They had upwards of 30 officers working the case, but in the early days of the investigation, all they could really tell the media is that they had determined that they didn't believe that this was a murder-suicide, which does seem fairly obvious to me. But for them, they were like, they were honest. They were like, we really don't have a lot of information. There really isn't a lot to go on from the scene. And the little information we have, we don't want to jeopardize by releasing it to the media. Which makes me wonder what they do have, because what I'm going to tell you about that they have isn't very much. So whatever they have that they're holding, like I hope that one day it's enough to lead them somewhere. Because it's crazy to me that after more 2007? No, wait. This has been a great sentence. Are you happy you're here? After nearly 20 years, we don't have answers. That seems crazy. But moving on, in order for the police to answer the question of who did this, who would want this entire family killed, they had to start looking at the scene and start looking into the lives of the victims. Now, from the scene, they were able to tell that the attacks on this family had happened more than a day before they were found. They said it was close to 30 hours before they were found. And when I think about those 2 little boys laying there hurt and in pain for all that time, it is enough to destroy you. But they were. Now, to try to narrow down when the murders actually took place, they looked at the cell phone records, okay? And they were able to tell that on the night of the 31st at about midnight, Isabelle responded to an email. So that would mean that they would have been alive then. And then at about 3:30 in the morning on the 31st, Jane had received a phone call, but she didn't answer this phone call. So because of those times, they believe that the murders happened between 12 a.m. when the email was sent and 3:30 a.m. when the phone call was not answered. Which to me, I'm like, it's possible she was asleep and that's why it wasn't answered, but this is what they're working with. And it also fits into the 30 hours thing from when they were found. From the scene, they were also able to see that there was no forced entry, the sliding glass door was unlocked, and none of the windows had any sign that they had been recently tampered with. So they theorized that Jane had let whoever this person was into the house voluntarily. And another reason they believe that this was true is from the evidence that was in the house, they were able to tell that Jane and whoever did this had sat together at like the kitchen table for a period of time prior to them attacking her. They were also able to determine that they didn't believe that these murders were random. They believed that they were planned, and that's because whoever did this brought the murder weapon with them, okay? They don't know what this murder weapon was, but they are able to tell by the marks left on the bodies that it was something that was 12 to 15 inches long, and based on an injury that Jane had to, I believe it was the bottom of her chin, they could tell that one end of this long item was pronged or forked. And I went on Google trying to figure this out, trying to figure out what this could be. And the only thing I was able to land on that seems even probable, I'm not saying that this is it, because like I'm nobody, I know nothing about nothing. But the thing that I was looking at that I was like, oh, maybe was a crowbar, because it's, the length and the prongs and all that. But you'll have to let me know what you think, because I know some of you are far more creative than I am. But the point is that whoever did this, whoever killed Jane and her 2 daughters and beat those 2 boys, brought this with them because nothing in the house matched the injuries on their bodies. Now, I don't know about you, but I would think with a scene this violent, there would have to be physical evidence everywhere. That's what I would think. But apparently, that's not the case. They didn't find any blood or fingerprints that seemed like they shouldn't have been there. And that's not to say that whoever did this wasn't injured at all, because the detectives working the case said with how intense these crime scenes were and how brutal these murders were, they do believe that this person was likely hurt or cut. But the problem is that there was so much of Jane and her family's blood that even if this person had had a cut and had bled, if it had been into a puddle of blood that was already there, it would be so little in comparison that it would be diluted or undetectable. Because, I mean, you look at a puddle of blood, how are you going to separate one blood from the other? You know what I mean? So there was that. And then all of the fingerprints that were found in the house, because they fingerprinted the house, took fingerprints, dusted and all that jazz, and all the fingerprints that were there belonged to people who had a reason to be there. Or they belonged to our family. So anyways, that is weird, right? It is weird that there wouldn't be any blood from the killer or any fingerprints, but I guess it could be, explained away by luck, honestly, because fingerprints aren't as easy to pick up off of surfaces as one would think, or as CSI and Law and Order has made us believe. But it's also possible that it wasn't luck and it was preparation, because whoever did this did seem to be prepared, because, and this is the part that's very crazy and is hard for me to explain, it was hard for police to explain, and that's that there was no blood transfer from one crime scene to the next. So Jane was killed in the kitchen, right? Isabelle at the stairs, Annabelle upstairs down the hall, and the boys were beaten in their room. Yet there was none of Jane's blood where Isabelle was, none of Isabelle's blood where Annabelle was, and none of Annabelle's blood with the boys. There wasn't even any blood transferred outside the house, right? There was none on the porch. There was none on the driveway. There was none in the grass. There was no droplets or swipes. There was nothing. And these people were literally beaten to death. There would have been blood everywhere. Now, despite the fact that the blood wasn't transferred from scene to scene, police don't believe that this killer was necessarily smart or prepared. They think that they were more emotionally driven just because of the extent that they went when hurting Jane, specifically. But it's like, if he wasn't smart and just emotionally driven and he just happened to have the weapon with him, like, he obviously planned it to some extent. But how did he not get blood anywhere? And to explain that, they think it's possible that there was more than one person who was there, which would explain why, if one person was doing each crime, then there wouldn't be blood transfer from place to place, right? But then why would Jane let multiple people into her house that late at night with whatever weapons were used? You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So who would do this? To figure this out, one of the steps that police took is one of the officers working the case decided there was a gathering, of people, family and friends that got together after the murders were committed to, be with each other. And like I said, very close-knit community, right? So they were all together. And this officer went there to make himself available to anybody who would want to talk, and also just to kind of watch and look around and see if anybody was acting suspicious, basically. Don't be suspicious. Or do be suspicious because I want to catch you, basically. Now, while the officer was there, he did get a lead. There was a man named Patrick who came up and talked to him. And Patrick was a friend of the family's, a guy who went to the same church where the family went and where Annabelle volunteered. Remember I told you about that? Okay. So he comes up to the officer during this gathering, and he says that he had heard a rumor. And the rumor was that the Mungiki? I'm so sorry. Mungiki gang may be responsible. And this was a gang that was in Kenya, that worked out of Kenya, and they were referred to as the Kenyan Mafia. And apparently they were known for assaulting and killing political enemies. Now, why and how that would link to Jane and her family, it's a little sketchy. Now, Patrick, he was from Kenya. He'd been in the U.S. a couple of years. He had a job. He worked days. He had a wife and she worked nights, had a couple kids. He was close with Jane, went to the same church as Jane, and knew all of her family. Okay. And so he comes to police and he's telling them that he heard this rumor, but the rumor stemmed from the fact that Jane told him that her husband had been murdered by this gang. This is what he's telling police. Now, as I said, this guy Patrick did seem to be close with the family. Maybe this was somebody that Jane would confide in. Like, he went to the same church as them. As I said, Annabelle would babysit his kids from time to time. He had developed a pretty good friendship with Jane. Even though he was married, he was often over at Jane's house. He would mow her lawn and do chores for her around her house. And it was to the point the police were kind of wondering what the real nature of his and Jane's friendship really was. And they felt even more curious about Patrick and his relationship with Jane and the family when they looked into him and found some things that were just a little bit strange. For example, Jane had reportedly loaned this guy Patrick $5,000. It was money that he was going to be sending to his father in Kenya to have switched into Kenyan currency and also for him to buy weed. And the reason this is relevant is that when police were searching the crime scene after the family was attacked and the girls were murdered, they found some notes on the table. Remember, there was people who were supposedly sitting at the table where they found some notes on the table, and these papers had like numbers and figures and totals that were added up. And I just said that Jane had loaned Patrick $5,000. Well, these numbers and these figures, when they added up to $5,000. So it seemed like maybe Jane was keeping a tab on what he was spending money on. But then when police questioned Patrick about this money that was loaned, he said that Jane had not been on top of him to pay it back. It had been very casual. And she had told him, like, just get it back to me when you can. But, okay, there was more than just the money that had police looking at Patrick. The next thing that they had that made him suspicious to them was his relationship with Annabelle, because as I mentioned to you, Annabelle babysat for his kids from time to time. Well, apparently he didn't always pay Annabelle in cash for this service. He would instead take her to dinner by himself, just the two of them. And people thought this was strange. People in hindsight were like, maybe this man was grooming Annabelle. And in that case, if he was grooming Annabelle, he would have been grooming Jane as well, because oftentimes in the cases where adults are grooming kids, they also groom the family and the people who are around the kid so that they can gain unfiltered access to this child. They want to groom the parents so that if anyone ever has anything weird to say about this person, they would be like, what, Patrick? No, he would never. He's the nicest guy. So that was just a theory that some people had, that maybe he was grooming Annabelle. But a lot of people think that it's more likely that he was in a relationship with Jane. There's no hard proof because Jane's not here to answer this question and Patrick is not talking. But people think it's possible that they were having a little bit of an affair. And that's because police, when investigating the murder, wanted to get the phone records, right? They wanted to get Jane's phone records, and not just for like the week before, but for the month or 2 months before the murders. And when they looked at these phone records, they were like, wow, Jane and Patrick talk a lot. Like a lot. Like every single day, multiple times a day. And by multiple, I mean upwards of 10 times a day. In the month before Jane was murdered, they had spoken more than 300 times on the phone. So just friends? I don't know. And even members of her family didn't really think so, because Diana herself said that she had seen an interaction between Jane and Patrick that made her think that they probably were more than just friends. Now, when they learned all of this about Patrick, they started to think that he was somebody they should be looking into. And the fact that he had come to them and told them about this Kenya mafia situation was a way for him to just point the investigators in a direction that wasn't towards himself. And they felt even more confident in this idea that Patrick was someone they should look into, and that this Kenya mafia had nothing to do with it for a couple of reasons. One, they had gotten Jane's husband's death certificate and saw that his cause of death was listed as pneumonia, not murder. And two, this Kenyan mafia did exist for sure, but they didn't really work in the U.S. and they wouldn't have a way to just easily get to the U.S. to kill Jane and her kids years after her husband's death that was ruled pneumonia, not murder anyway. So they bring Patrick in for questioning. They sit him down and they ask him about where he was at the time that Jane and her family were being attacked. And he says that he was at home, but he was alone with his kids because, again, his wife worked nights. They then ask him about his relationship with Jane, and he says that the two are just friends. They say, okay, if you guys are just friends, then friends that talk every single day, 10 times a day. And he said he could see how that could look strange, but they were, in fact, just friends. And okay, I said that they talked every single day for the month leading up to the murders, right? And that's almost true. Almost true, but not entirely true. They did talk every single day, except one day. They talked every single day, multiple times a day, except for the 31st. Except for after the family was murdered. Even though they talked every single day before this, and even though at this time he would not have known that this family was dead yet, he only called Jane one time at 10 p.m. the night before they were killed. So the cops ask him why he didn't call Jane on the 31st, why he had called her every other day leading up to this multiple times a day, but didn't call her on that day except for one time. And he just said he didn't know. He didn't know. He just hadn't. Now, police, they're suspicious about Patrick for sure. They definitely feel like something's weird about him, but there's not much they can do. They've questioned him. He's pretty open and honest. He gives all the answers he can until it's something that's going to make him look a little bit suspicious, and then he doesn't know and he clams up and he just says, I don't know. But he sat with them, answered the questions. He gave DNA, he gave hair samples, he gave everything that they asked for. So they had nothing they could really hold him on. And the problem with this is he gives hair, he gives DNA, he gives fingerprints, but they have nothing to test it against. So even though it's like useful and seemingly useful, it's not actually useful because they can't use it. Now, he wouldn't know that. So him giving it still does make him look less guilty, because why would you give it if you were the person who did this? And you wouldn't know that they couldn't test it because you don't know how careful you were. But that's what happened. And we do see killers give up their DNA all the time. Like, remember the Chiquita Matt case? You remember the Chiquita Matt case? The guy who literally assaulted and killed her gave his DNA, knowing damn well his DNA was going to be in this fucking child, you know? Like, so it does happen. It's just, here we find ourselves with an unsolved case nearly 20 years later. And I'm not saying that Patrick did this because I don't know who did this. I'm not an investigator. I'm just telling you the information that is out there. I don't even know if Patrick's his real name. It's just what's used. Now, if you're like me, though, moving on, if you're like me, you're thinking the boys, Jeremy and PK. If Patrick was the one who did this, they survived. They may be able to identify him as their attacker, right? Here's the thing. It would take a long time before the boys were even in a state mentally, physically, where they could look at somebody and see if this was who had attacked them. Like, PK was in a coma for a week. Jeremy was in a coma for several weeks, which this was so hard on this family, dude. They had to sit there. They were there with these boys every single day, just sitting there waiting for them to wake up, having no idea if they would. You remember Lucy, the family member of Jane's, who was the first one to try to call but couldn't get a hold of her? Well, she was there every day. She actually became Jeremy's guardian, and she would go there every single day, waiting beside him, just hoping one day she would show up and his eyes were open. And one day she did. She got there one day and he had his eyes open and he couldn't move and he couldn't speak, but he was awake. Unfortunately, though, even though both boys did wake up, their memories were shot, dude. Like, they had been unconscious more than a day, which is incredibly unusual. I don't know about you, but from watching movies, I thought you get knocked out for long periods of time and that's normal. Apparently, not so much. I'm not a doctor, but I guess when you get knocked out, if it's more than like a couple seconds, that is dangerous and unusual. And these boys were unconscious for more than a day. So most of their memories were completely gone. They could hardly remember anything about the attacks. Once they were stable, the cops did try to talk to the boys, but again, they didn't really remember much at all. Little Jeremy said that all he remembered before waking up in a hospital with all of his family literally being gone was just being with his cousins, eating a dinner of ugali, Ugali, having fun, playing, and then going to bed early because they were exhausted from all the time that they spent in the sun. And then that was it. Years later, he did get more memories. More memories came back to him, and he said he remembered a man being there with a Kenyan accent that was wearing a shirt that had like African patterns on it, but that's all he remembered. And then for PK, he had little blips and pieces of memories, but not enough for police to even have a physical description of who did this to them. And what's so terrible here is that without any real suspects, this case went cold. And to this day, it's unsolved. Which is insane to me that it's unsolved. And it's insane to me that prior to just like this last week, I had never even heard of this case. A case of an entire family being murdered in their home, you would think would be like nationally talked about. You'd think we would all know about it because it's an unsolved case of this magnitude. But I had never heard of it. And it's been almost 20 years of this family having no answers, of this poor boy having no answers as to who murdered his entire family, and then having to live with the fact of knowing that you were there and you just can't remember. All Jeremy could remember was waking up in a hospital, having no idea what was going on, and his entire family was gone. His entire life was changed, and his family wasn't even going to be buried near him, which is so, it just adds to the pain he was already feeling. While these boys were unconscious, the family had services and prayers nonstop. And during this time, they were also trying to raise money because they knew they were going to have 3 bodies to send back to Kenya for burial. And they actually ended up, I think, raising up to $50,000 towards this and for Jeremy for in the future, because what's going to happen with him, right? So Jane and her 2 daughters were flown back to their homeland of Kenya to be buried together. And what's terrible is at the time, Jeremy is still in the hospital. So he wasn't even present for their burial after losing his entire family. Not for the burial and not for the service that was held before the bodies were shipped. Hundreds of family members and friends gathered at Trinity Chapel in Powder Springs. 3 coffins covered in pink and red flowers, surrounded by photos of Jane, Isabelle, and Annabelle, sat at the front of the service, where people came and they clapped and they sang hymns in both English and Swahili, and many people were dressed in colorful African clothing, and it sounds just like hauntingly beautiful. And then they were sent home for burial. And can you even imagine being the family members in Kenya who are there to accept the 3 cargo boxes that contained your family members' bodies? Like, oh my God, the trauma. And then on top of that, oh God, speaking of trauma, the trauma that the family was going to have to go through when it came to Jeremy and the custody over him, because his mother's gone, his father's gone, his 2 sisters are gone. And it got very messy and it's confusing and just so sad, honestly. So how do I even explain this? Okay, so you remember how I said that Jane's family member, Lucy, was Jeremy's guardian and was at the hospital the whole time he was unconscious and everything? Well, apparently, this woman, who I believe wasn't a family member, but instead was a friend of Jane's, ended up taking control of the situation out of nowhere and just left the family totally shocked. So I guess how they found out this was happening is that Diana, the cousin who found the bodies, was going to go and identify the bodies. But this woman named Elizabeth contacted her and was like, oh, you don't need to do that. I've already taken care of it. And then from there, this woman, Elizabeth, ended up becoming like the spokesperson for the family in the aftermath of the murders, which is something that was very shocking to the family, and I guess culturally is not how it's done. According to Diana, it's not common in these situations in their community, in their culture, for a family to be the person who takes the lead and is the spokesperson. But at the time, Diana was only 22 and this woman was her elder. And you may be wondering, okay, what about Lucy? She was older. Well, Lucy had to leave for a short period of time. She had to go back to Kenya for, I'm not exactly sure what the reason was, but she returned shortly thereafter with her mother, which was Jeremy's grandmother. And she was super anxious to get there and see her grandbaby, who had just been through such a trauma. But when they get back from Kenya, they go to the hospital to do this. They find out that this woman, Elizabeth, had Lucy's name and the family members' names taken off all of Jeremy's paperwork and instead had replaced it with Elizabeth's name and information as Jeremy's guardian. And she had done this without Lucy's consent. And I guess the way she was able to do this, because you're like, how the fuck can somebody do that? I will say, when somebody dies or is dying, who is on the paperwork gets very confusing, especially when the person who makes these decisions isn't able to make them. That's all I will say. But the point is, Elizabeth was able to get close to Jane's mother while Lucy was out of the picture, making it possible for Jane's mother to make it possible for Elizabeth to get put as the person in charge. Does that make sense? I feel like I explained that poorly, but I think you get the gist of it. The point is, Elizabeth was now in charge. So when Jeremy was well enough to be released from the hospital, he and his grandmother went to live in Elizabeth's house together, and he wasn't able to see his family. His family said that after that, they only got to see him once or twice a year. And Jeremy was, of course, not happy about this, but he was just a kid. He didn't really have control over his situation. And he said that he didn't even really like living with Elizabeth because she wasn't like a mother figure to him or nurturing in any way. She was more like his principal. And Elizabeth wasn't only in charge of Jeremy, she was essentially in charge of everything that had once belonged to Jane. I guess after all was said and done, Elizabeth went and sold all of Jane's stuff. She sold her house, she sold her car, she sold all of the family's belongings under the guise of putting this money into a trust that was for Jeremy. But then Jeremy didn't get access to this trust, which is infuriating. I guess like he had asked about it and she would just like deflect. And when he became an adult, he even like tried to pursue legal actions to fight for his money. This would have been, I believe, in 2018. And this is because he ended up having to have surgery for, I believe it was a brain tumor. And him and his family believed that the brain tumor was a result of the attack on him back in 2007, since a lot of the damage was to his head. And I have no idea if this fight for this money was even successful, or if this woman just got all this money from the family and dipped, basically. And I just find that to be incredibly sad. I find this whole case to be incredibly sad, but the saddest part of all is, of course, the fact that it's still unsolved. It's the fact that somebody could brutally murder 3 women and attempt to kill 2 kids. 2 kids. I mean, Annabelle was a kid too. She was just 16 years old, and then never get caught and just be out in the world living as if nothing even happened. That is so scary to me. Like, who could do something like that? Now, of course, there are theories as to who would do something like that. And the first theory comes from something I haven't even mentioned yet. And that is that after her death, several family members came forward and said that Jane had expressed to them that she was going to be coming into a rather large sum of money. Now, she was said to have gotten involved in some sort of real estate business, but what exactly she was doing was unclear, but it seems to have to do with the sale of a house. And so some of her family members think that the murders could be related to some sort of business deal gone wrong. Next, when it comes to theories, is that there are definitely a lot of people out there who think it was very strange for Elizabeth to basically come out of nowhere, take control of everything, and financially gain so much from this family's murder. And of course, when you're looking at people who have motive to do something, whoever benefited the most from the family being dead is somebody you would want to look at when it comes to them being killed, right? But unfortunately, it is not uncommon at all. It's a sad truth, but it is not at all uncommon for people to get shitty and greedy with one another when people die. It's sad and it's true, but it does happen. And there is nothing that links this woman, Elizabeth, if that's even her real name. Again, I don't know. There's nothing that links her to the murders. And then, of course, there's Patrick, right? He's somebody that people seriously look at when it comes to the murders. I mean, there was the potential relationship between him and Jane, the potential grooming of Annabelle, and then the $5,000 loan, right? Any of those things could be a reason for somebody who is unhinged to justify killing somebody and killing an entire family. It's enough that it could make somebody snap is the point. And then you take all of those things and you add the fact that after the burials, after the murders, Patrick just sort of dipped. I mean, prior to that, he had been so engaged and focused on the family, but after everything was said and done, he just completely dipped. He never even checked to see if Jeremy, who he also was close with, was okay. But, you know, police have never found a solid connection between Patrick and the murders. There have just been weird things that could mean something or could mean nothing. And like they have his DNA, his fingerprints, and his hair, but none of that was found at the scene or could be found. There wasn't any physical evidence at the scene to connect it to. So there's no way to know for sure, at least at this point, if he was connected in any way. And, you know, there are also people out there who think, like the cops think, that it's possible that more than one person was involved, which would Patrick be connected to other people who would want this done, or would it just be him? Now, speaking of police thinking that multiple people were involved, there have been some people who have theorized that maybe Patrick and Elizabeth, because they're the only 2 people who have been named, right? They wonder if maybe they worked together, and that's why there's evidence that more than one person was involved, like the fact that blood wasn't transferred from scene to scene. But police have even looked into that and found that there's no connection between Elizabeth and Patrick, except for the fact that they went to the same church. But like, at least it has been released. There's no like phone calls or anything like that. So they don't think that that's entirely likely. But that's just something that people say because people are like, it's weird that he had a lot of reasons and she wanted some money, that maybe there was a connection, but police haven't expressed their interest in that theory that I've seen. Now, something that police have that they think is their strongest lead when it comes to who may be responsible for the murders is a bloody towel. Apparently, this bloody towel was found after the murders, and it was found about 2 miles away from the house. The towel was not there prior to the murders, but was there after, and it has been collected and it has been tested. The blood has been tested, and they have found that the blood is not a match to Jane or any of her kids, and also is not a match to any of the suspects that they have in their minds, which I would assume would also include Patrick, since he gave his DNA for testing. Now, the lead investigator handling this case, or at least the person who was handling this case, I think he may have retired. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that. But he believed that this towel was linked to the murders. He didn't explain why he thought it was linked, like what about it, since the DNA didn't match the DNA from the house. They haven't explained why he thinks it's connected, but he does believe it's connected. And he wanted to take the DNA from the towel and run it through the computers. But apparently, quote, civil liberties protections prevent them from running the towel through the database of DNA profiles they have for convicted violent offenders. But they did have a plan to run the DNA from this towel through the genealogical... I just forgot how to speak. Genealogy databases to try to see if they could find a familial match. We've covered a lot of cases where this is how they're solved, is taking DNA, putting it through, finding family members, narrowing it down, right? So that's something that they were planning to do. I don't know if they have done it because there hasn't been any updates. That was the last thing that they were planning to do. But the thing is, I still don't understand how they have linked the towel to the house if none of the DNA on the towel was matched to anyone from the house. But this is what they're working with, at least the last reporting stated. So that's where we are with what's been made public. Lots of questions, very few answers, and a shattered family. Jeremy and PK have tried to live normal lives in the aftermath of their trauma, but they are haunted. Once he was older, Jeremy did go back to Kenya, where he was able to reconnect with some family and study medicine, apparently excelling greatly and getting straight A's. And PK moved back to Kenya, where he studied music. Jeremy now has a son who's never met his grandmother, who never got to know his aunts. And as far as I know, Jane's parents have both died, so they didn't get to figure out what happened to their daughter or their granddaughters. And this entire family that's left living with this knowledge that this case has never been solved are left in a hopeless situation. They don't know how to move forward. There are several people spanning multiple countries who just want answers and just want justice. And Diana said of this, and I quote, "We still all love each other and care for each other, but we still all feel the same way. It's about time it's closed, and we all got some closure." So if you have any information about this case, please contact the Cobb County District Attorney's Office or the Cold Case Unit tip line at 770-528-3032 or email coldcase@cobbcounty.org or go to unsolved.com. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Jane, Isabelle, and Annabelle, and the attempted murders of both Jeremy and PK. I hope you found this to be informative. I hope I gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering them with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Who do you believe is responsible for the Kuria family massacre? Do you think it's somebody that we've discussed today, or do you think it's somebody who's just gone totally under the radar? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, or you may not know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 weeks, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. If you don't already know, what you're seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears is also a podcast. So if you want to go there, give it a listen. It's True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN. Give it a listen, give it a like, a download, a share. I'm trying to get out in the algorithm, so I greatly appreciate it if you did. But if not, that's also fine. I just want to thank you for being here. Because this is my baby. This is my number one. That's my number two. I love it. That's my number one. Now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.